Welcome to a new Team CGC 9.8 video. So a bit of a different video today. I wanted to talk about exactly what you need to do if you're just getting back into comic books. Because we'll get this question quite often from the team, like, love the whole 9.8 philosophy, but I'm just getting back into things, like what should I do? So a couple things to keep in mind here for sure. First thing, I think when you're just getting back into the hobby, it really helps to sort of define what type of collector you want to be. And this is going to help you sort of decide like what type of things I should buy and how many of what type of things I should be buying. And it's going to be, totally different compared to your personal situation and your wants and needs. But the best way that I like to think about this, what type of collector I want to be, is to sort of think of like a continuum or a spectrum where you got collector on the one side, a pure collector on the one side, and a pure investor on the other side. And based on your personal situation, you're going to land somewhere along that spectrum. So, if we think about like what is a pure collector, first off here, for me, a pure collector, there's really like almost no rules, to be honest. Like, maybe the only rule is to buy what you love, because why would you buy anything if you didn't really like it? But there's really not too many rules if you're a pure collector. I find, most collectors are just kind of following their heart. They're not really, thinking about, is this thing I'm going to buy like going to slowly, steadily increase in value over time? Like, is there any intrinsic value to this thing I'm buying? And, so that's going to be the bit of a mindset of a pure collector. And if we use an example, like say you were a pure collector and last year you spent $2,000 on the hobby. Like, in my opinion, a pure collector is going to be buying a lot of new comic books, maybe a couple omnibuses or some trade paperbacks or something like that. Maybe a couple back issues as well. And, maybe like a statue or some Funko Pops. Like, you're just kind of all over the place collecting, whatever your heart's desires kind of thing. Now, if we go on the other end of the spectrum, we use kind of that $2,000 example there, where say you were a pure investor and last year you spent $2,000 on the hobby, what would you have purchased? Well, as a pure investor, pretty much 4 big key issues, and that's it. So that just gives you like the super stark contrast between an investor and a collector. An investor, you're being very picky, very specific. You're really only thinking about, is this thing gonna, slowly, steadily kind of increase in value? Does it have a really cool first appearance? Is it a big iconic hero or villain? And with that $2,000, and I'm just using a quick example, a pure investor would, really just buy the 4 biggest key issues you could, and, would pretty much save their money to put toward those big 4 key issues, so they're not, buying too many trade paperbacks or new comic books or anything like that. So, myself personally, I'm definitely leaning toward the investor side of the spectrum. I would say like probably 75% of my CGC 9.8s, I'm really, when I buy them, I'm like, great first appearance, gonna be around forever, gonna increase in value steadily, pretty rare in the 9.8, whatever 9.8 it is. Whereas, maybe 25% of the 9.8s I'm buying, I'm like, oh, I just love that cover, I gotta have it. And that's more of a collector mentality than an investor mentality. So I'm a little bit of both, but leaning toward an investor perspective for sure. So that's the one thing you want to do, and it's going to be different for everyone. You kind of define what type of collector you want to be, and it's going to give you a way better idea of like how much stuff you should be buying. Like, if you want to be an investor, you shouldn't be buying all these trade paperbacks and new comic book day books that will probably be super hard to sell and almost worth nothing in 5 to 10 years. Certainly you'll get lucky in there. There might be one or few key issues, but you don't, if you want to be an investor, you don't want to do that, and you want to be very specific, and you want to save your money for those big type of purchases, and you're kind of big game hunting if you're a pure investor, I guess you could call it. So super helpful, and I think that's one of the first things you want to do, because you maybe hear occasionally some people where they'll be buying a lot of new comic books and omnibuses, and just because they're getting right into it, they think they're really cool. But really all along, they sort of had an investor mentality, but they just didn't really listen to it, maybe, that intuition, and they probably spent too much money on things that are not really considered comic book investments, like maybe smaller keys or, again, trade paperbacks or omnibuses or something like that. So just defining what type of collector you are and knowing it is going to give you a way clearer idea of some of the things you can buy and some of the things to go after. Okay, I next recommend here, I want to recommend an Overstreet price guide as being just a really good resource if you're just getting back into the hobby of collecting comic books. And you know, I know now they have apps, like there's apps online. There's one small detail I think is a huge benefit for Overstreet price guides. I got a couple here. I got this one, I think 2018, 2019. This one's 2016, 2017. This is the one I bought when I initially got back into the hobby. But I think there's a small benefit to these Overstreet guides as opposed to the apps. The apps are great. You know, you look up a book on the app, you get all the information right away, awesome. But I find, you know, say you want to look up a key issue and you go in your Overstreet price guide, you know, the fact that they're all listed, so you get the whole run all listed, you have to kind of go through all of them and find your one key and think, okay, that's the key I want to find, you get your information, and then, you know, you're more likely to go, oh, like I'm going to look back at all these other key issues now because they're listed in the Overstreet price guide, and you just, there's more opportunities for kind of like, I guess you'd call it like pin action learning or something like that, where, you know, you go to look up one key issue and then you end up reading about like all the other key issues in that run, or maybe you were flipping through the book and you ended up just getting sidetracked and you started learning about some other key issues that you didn't know about before. And I think when you're getting back into the hobby, that's important because you're trying to like refresh your memory on all the cool key issues and stuff like that. And I think the Overstreet price guide really helps with that. Whereas the apps, you look up one key issue on the app, you get all the information, and then that's it. Like you're on to whatever else you want to look up, and you know, you're not going to get any kind of like pin action learning, I guess you could say. I don't know why I come up with that term, but so I would really recommend buying an Overstreet price guide. It doesn't even really have to be up to date. I know there's the new one out with the Todd McFarlane cover. I kind of want that one. I hadn't got the latest Overstreet price guide, but I just find they're super handy to have around. They're great just to read, like, you know, at night if you just want to flip through, and again, another opportunity to learn more there, especially when you're new into the hobby. Yeah, you want those opportunities for learning more because you want to be refreshed of all the great key issues that, you know, you remembered when you were a kid, or whatever your situation is. Maybe you're completely new to the hobby, then I think even an Overstreet book is even way better because, again, yeah, they're all the issues are listed. Like every comic book is in here pretty much, so you can really go back and learn about all the keys you've ever wanted. If, you know, say you're looking up a Batman book, you go back, learn all the Batman keys. So I just found it so helpful when I got back into the hobby to have an Overstreet price guide rather than just using the apps and the internet. Okay, so let's get into a couple details here about collecting comics using an investment perspective, because I mentioned there that sort of a continuum or spectrum of collector to investor. You know, as a collector, as I said, there's almost no rules. Buy what you love and follow your heart, basically, as a collector. But from an investment perspective, I think there's some rules that you should follow that can really help you out. So interesting, when you're investing in comic books, I almost think it's a little bit easier than collecting comic books. Like it almost takes a little bit less work because, in my opinion, you want to be really simple when you're investing in comic books. You really don't want to really consider like any eclectic under the radar key issues. You just want to go to the big key issues, the big first appearances, the most popular books. And those are really the only ones that you have to consider when you're sort of purely investing in comics. So that's going to put you down to probably about 5 to 10 comic books in each decade, I guess you could say. So, you know, like in the 1980s, Amazing Spider-Man 300, Amazing Spider-Man 252, Star Wars 42, just getting into the 80s there. But if you go back to the 70s, like Star Wars 1, Hulk 181, Giant Size X-Men. So just the big keys are really all you have to consider when you're purely investing in comic books, because yeah, basically the trend shows that those have been the best investments over the last 10 to 20 years, and for good reason. Like they have the first appearances of the most iconic, popular heroes. And yeah, there's just no reason to fight that. When you're investing in comics, especially if you're doing it like 100%, you want to really think about return on investment and the values of these books going up. You don't want to overthink things. You want to keep things really simple and stick to those mega keys, basically those big key issues that are pretty well known. So in that sense, it's kind of easier because you don't have to uncover all these like underfollowed keys. Or when you're a collector, you're all into like some of these niche things and underfollowed this and indie book that. Whereas as an investor, you just stick to those big brands and that's it, really. So it's in some sense a little bit simpler and easier than just collecting comics almost. Let's see a couple of other points I have here. I think a good point too, because obviously when you're investing in comics, I think you should stick to those big key issues. You still want to leave room, maybe make a short list of 5 or 10 issues that are personally kind of nostalgic to you, and maybe you just remember them from when you were a kid, and then you can add a little personal touch to your collection. And that's sort of what I've done. Yeah, like I'm definitely on the end of that investor spectrum, but I'm leaning toward a collector a little bit, because I still buy some books not really thinking that they're going to be great investments or whatever. I just buy them because I want them, and I remember them from when I was a kid. So good example is 2 books here. Batman 423, a great example of not an obvious key issue, but still a pretty decent investment grade book that is a personal favorite of mine, big McFarlane Batman fan. And I've really enjoyed having this in my collection, and in the 9.8 it actually turned out to be a great investment. So that was a bonus pretty much, but you still want to add a couple of those personal favorites, I think, to your collection. Albeit though, if you are investing, stick to those big keys. Yeah, I mean, like Hulk 181, Giant Size X-Men #1, Amazing Spider-Man 300, Star Wars #1, Star Wars 42, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1, Amazing Spider-Man, 252, New Mutants 98, getting into the 90s, Batman Adventures 12, like, just the big keys are really all you have to consider and think about when you really are investing in comic books. Okay, but add those, personal nostalgic picks. I think getting, a group of 5 or 10 of those together could be a good seasoning, I would say, on your investor collection. Now, a specific point that, pretty much the whole channel is kind of based on this point. From 1980s to present, comic books, like, they're not super rare. They're not really, like, they were pretty heavily printed, really popular, so they're actually not that rare. So if you're coming at it from an investment perspective, from the 1980s from 1980 to present, we'll call it, I think I'd really recommend CGC 9.8 comic books, because yeah, again, these books just weren't that rare during this time, and a 9.8 is kind of the best way to get the most rare version of a book in the best grade, in the highest grade. And I think if you have that investment perspective, it's certainly worth doing that if you're thinking about buying key issues from 1980 up until the present. Wanted to make that point. And, some keys in there, some big keys like Amazing Spider-Man 300 might be out of your budget. So certainly there's some, gray areas in there, some wiggle room. But talking about before 1980 now, I think you really just want to stick to those big keys, absolutely big iconic heroes, Hulk 181, Giant Size X-Men #1, Amazing Fantasy 15, Tales of Suspense 39, Incredible Hulk #1. Just, the first appearance of the biggest heroes you can think of to match whatever your budget is before 1980. So, if all you can afford is maybe a Hulk 181 CGC 3, then that's fine. That's, I think, a good way to go if that fits your budget kind of thing when you're investing in comic books. Okay, so some details there to think about if you do kind of choose to go the investor perspective, or the investor way on that spectrum, which that's pretty much what this channel focuses on, and that's what I've sort of focused on. Although lately I've been buying more new Comic Book Day books, so I'm maybe leaning over to the collector end of that spectrum a little bit. But I think we made most of the points here. We'll conclude up in 3 points, and just kind of going over what we already did a bit. Concluding up, first point, just figure out what type of collector you are. Maybe you're more of a collector, or you're more of an investor. Buy an Overstreet price guide, the second point. Buy an Overstreet price guide. It might seem useless right now when there's a million apps out there and stuff like that, but I just find, you'll uncover some great keys, and especially if you're just getting back into the hobby, it's a great way to kind of refresh your memory of all the great keys from the past. And last thing here, if you're an investor, if you choose to be an investor, buy those big keys, those big iconic heroes. And if you choose to be a collector, just follow your heart, basically. Buy what you love and follow your heart, and you really can't go wrong, I think. Okay, so yeah, I wanted to make a pretty basic video, albeit just to talk about, some of the, I think, important tips that can be helpful when you're just getting back into comics. Because I think certainly with coronavirus and everything, there's been a lot of people getting back into the hobby, and there's still people that message me now, just getting back into things, and can't wait to kind of get more 9.8s and all that. Everyone's really excited, which is great. But yeah, you want to kind of figure out what type of collector you want to be. You want to get an overstreet price guide, and then if you're an investor, you want to stick to those big brands, and if you're a collector, you just pretty much want to follow your heart and buy everything that you think is really cool. And then you almost can't go wrong. Yeah. Okay, we'll leave it at that, though. Thanks so much for watching today. I really appreciate all the support from the team. If you haven't already, though, I would invite you to join the team and subscribe to Team CGC 9.8. Hit the bell for all the latest notifications. Add me on Instagram and Twitter, too. All the links in the description below for that. But thanks so much. Yeah, hopefully just got some of the beginner things to think about. And yeah, because I mentioned there, like, you almost don't want to skip that first step, because I think a lot of people, they'll just get into comic book collecting. They'll buy a ton of back issues. They spend like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars on new comic books and trade paperbacks and back issues. But back in their mind, they're like, you know what? I want to like invest in comics. I want to be more serious about this. So I think it's way better to kind of do that at the beginning, so then you don't end up wasting tons of money on back issues and trade paperbacks that you'll never be able to sell. So definitely, I think this is kind of one of the first steps to do if you're just getting back into comic book collecting. All right, thanks so much again for watching, though. I really appreciate all the support, and I'll see you on the next one.